Good morning, this is Angela with Parkrose Permaculture. I took a day off from making videos yesterday. I had a pretty whopper migraine, and then we did house projects because it was very rainy. But this morning it's just lovely out. So I wanted to make a video discussing another permaculture concept. So in permaculture, we've talked before, there are 12 principles that guide the design process of permaculture. Permaculture is not just gardening, it is whole system design to make life for humans more sustainable, more efficient, with less work and higher yields, and to make it so that the way we as humans live meshes with the rest of the planet and the rest of the inhabitants of the planet, human and otherwise, so that we can all live in a way that is sustainable and not extractive. So one of the permaculture principles is produce no waste. And this one can be really tricky for people, especially if you have suburban or urban permaculture. And I really want to encourage folks who live in a suburban or urban setting to think about produce no waste in a context greater than just your yard. And I'll talk about what I mean when I say that in just a moment. So, produce no waste. Okay, let's talk about some small examples. Right here I have my kindling rack. And I save all of the prunings from my fruit trees. And these are some of the bigger prunings. Save all of these. They're not a waste product. A lot of gardeners see prunings as a waste product and they go in the yard waste bin, or sometimes they get bagged and put on the curb for the garbage if people have no yard waste pickup. And in Portland, we're fortunate enough to have yard waste pickup. So everything I want to look at as a resource, even little tiny plum prunings and quince prunings, everything is a resource. So produce no waste means, one, I don't throw things away because there is no away, right? So when you throw things away, you are just handing that problem off to somebody else to deal with. We are a family of 6 and we use micro cans, so we get one garbage pickup every other week in Portland, and we have the smallest can. And we struggle, we fill it up. I would love to get to where we are not utilizing any of the waste disposal from the city and having any garbage, but we're not there yet. Part of that is because just the nature of the way that food is produced, a lot of the problems with waste production are at the corporation level and the producer level and not at the consumer level. So sometimes it's very difficult to eliminate some of those chains of waste without spending a tremendous amount of money. And I want to acknowledge that not everybody has the financial resources. Being waste-free and plastic-free is often a privilege. It means you can buy things from co-ops where the food is more expensive. It means you have time to utilize those pathways of production and resources, and that's not always available to everybody. And permaculture is meant to be accessible. So the goal is produce no waste, but I don't know if it's 100% attainable on the individual level. It requires systemic change. So when we say produce no waste, one way I really like thinking about this is, let's say you're having a meeting at work. You're having a staff meeting, and your boss comes in and says, all right, we're going to sit down and discuss like a really heady issue. We're having some problems. I want everyone to assume positive intent in this conversation. We're having some interpersonal issues, but I need us to assume positive intent. That's how I see produce no waste. Everything that is happening in the garden, every excess or every issue, I want to assume positive intent with it. So just like I'm going to assume my coworkers' words are framed, if I hear them one way, I'm going to reroute the way I'm thinking and assume positive intent in their words. I need to reroute and retrain my brain to assume positive intent and think of the items in my garden that are causing me frustration and conflict. I need to think of those as being a resource that I just haven't found a use for yet. So there is no such thing as garbage. There is no such thing as waste. There are just resources for which we have not yet found a use. And if you think of your problems in the garden that way, you'll find that it can be really transformative, and you start to design for solutions, not problems. So we're designing to create solutions, not to mitigate problems. So for example, I'm going to pan back this way, and I'm going to excuse some of the mess because I've always got projects going. We had off the back of our house quite a bit of a rain problem from putting up this pergola many years ago. And right out the back door suddenly became very muddy because it's Oregon and it rains most of the year. So that's a problem. I've now got mud. I can put in gutters. But instead I chose to think like, this is a resource that I'm not tapping into. I have all this extra water. This is a resource. I need to design a way to utilize this. This isn't waste. This isn't a problem for me. So what I ended up doing is I put in a big rain garden, and I've talked about it in previous videos, and I'll talk about it more. And I'm actually going to walk up here and show you my Jacob's ladder, which looks gorgeous in the rain garden right now. So seeing that problem, that real big inconvenience of I have a ton of extra water, it's creating mud, what do I do? Instead of seeing that as a problem, I really love that this Jacob's ladder is mixed in with a bunch of volunteer love and a mist. I think these two plants look great together, and there's some calendula. So again, thinking about when we have a problem in the garden, our modern consumerist mindset is to think, how can I get rid of that? How can I throw that away? How can I push that problem aside? And that's not in keeping with the permaculture principle of produce no waste. Instead of seeing something as a problem to get rid of, let's see how we can utilize it. Let's see it how it's a resource. So for a classic example, composting toilets, right? Seeing human waste as a resource and a source of fertility and not a problem to be flushed away. I don't know if y'all watch Brad Lancaster's videos. He is a permaculturist in Tucson, and I'm just a huge fan. Have always really, really admired his work. He talks extensively about that. His book is Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond, I believe is the title. If you haven't checked out his videos, he's great. But he talks a lot about that, right? Thinking about a product we see as a waste and realizing that we need to utilize it as a resource, it's a missed opportunity if we think about just throwing something away and making it somebody else's problem. So another way to think about produce no waste. Boy, the hoverflies are out like crazy this morning because I said we had a lot of rain yesterday. A lot of bees and hoverflies were kind of chilling out and hunkering down. There are so many bumblebees and hoverflies out this morning. Lots of pollinators. So when we think about our garden, when we think about this permaculture principle, produce no waste, it can seem daunting. So tackle it one thing at a time. I took one thing at a time. I took my problem of extra water and figured out how to turn it into a garden and store water in the ground. Definitely going to do an update video on my rain garden and how the water storage is here and I have an overflow here and it helps feed the rest of my garden beds. So in permaculture, when we think about produce no waste, we want to deal with the concept in physics and ecology, the concept of a closed system. And this is where I said earlier in my video that I would get back to it. In permaculture, if you are doing permaculture in the city or suburban permaculture, it can be difficult to have a closed system. A closed system means you aren't importing or exporting matter. It doesn't mean you're not importing or exporting energy in some form, because we're still taking in sunlight. Rain is still coming onto our property. But we're not importing and exporting matter, and there are some exceptions. But that can be really difficult if you are living on 1/4 acre, or you're living on, in Portland, people have 0.08 acres. How do I have a closed system where I produce no waste and I don't import or export matter? That's not possible. And that's true. So I encourage you to think about your system as being larger than just your yard. And we'll talk in later videos about the permaculture principle of use and value the marginal and using edges. I think about the edge of my garden, including the greater neighborhood and the greater community. Because for me, it's not possible to do everything close. So prime example, right here, look down. I import wood chips. Loads and loads and loads of free wood chips every year from Chip Drop. That is matter, biomass brought in, and as it breaks down, it produces really nice friable soil. That's one of the big ways I don't have a closed system. I can't grow enough trees here, and the quality of my soil was so poor. I needed to increase the loaminess of the soil. I needed to provide cover, ground cover for my plants. And really the best way to do that right now is to bring in wood chips. However, this is an example of not having a closed system. However, before organizations like Chip Drop existed, I used to get my tree trimmings from the utility company. Without them, come and look at some bumblebees here while I talk. Without them, all those urban trees that were taken down that were obscuring power lines or causing other problems ended up going to the dump. So we're saving the dump fee for the tree trimmer. We're saving really useful biomass going to waste. So it's definitely still living out the permaculture principle of produce no waste, even if you're not utilizing it from your own yard, even if you're bringing it in and you don't have a closed system. Another example of how I don't have a closed system here, but I still produce no waste in that way, is that our ducks and chickens, we have a source for a lot of over mature produce and squashed whole grain bread, or pastries and products that have gone off. The same way that like a pig farmer might feed those kinds of things. Chickens and pigs are traditionally kept as livestock because they help in the concept of produce no waste. They take things that otherwise we couldn't utilize and they turn them into food products for us. So I do import those things, but I haven't had to buy poultry feed in quite a long time, and I'm taking a waste product and I'm using it, instead of compost, I'm using it to get eggs. So I'm taking somebody else's garbage and I'm making food for my family out of it. The third way that I really don't have a closed system is that I do utilize the Portland yard waste bin system. So every week we have a pickup from the yard waste, and because I don't have a large enough yard and I'm not set up for hot composting, and because Portland has a pretty significant rodent population that is not well taken care of, I don't have an open compost bin. And I also am unable to compost quite a few things in my garden using the trench compost method that I have. Because I can't do a hot compost, seeds will germinate in a cold compost. So invasive things in my yard like Himalayan blackberries, or if some other things end up blowing in that I don't want, I don't have a good way to compost those. without the city's hot compost. So I do utilize that. I feel like it's well worth it if you live in an urban setting to use your yard waste bin for an industrial hot compost where everyone can accumulate their things they can't compost at home, and it can be turned back into soil. So those 3 ways, I don't have a closed system. I bring in wood chips. I utilize the municipal garbage and yard waste system, and I import food for my chickens. But I think that's okay. It all still feeds toward the permaculture principle of producing no waste. So you can produce no waste and still have an open system or utilize close by resources. So I definitely want to talk more in some future videos about how I can minimize waste production and how I can embrace the permaculture principle of produce no waste. I have several other examples, but I am going to go inside and make my kids brunch because we have quite a glut of eggs right now. And then I'm going to work on some yard projects in my front yard. So I will let y'all go enjoy your Sunday afternoon, and I'll be back tomorrow. Please like this video, and please feel free to leave comments and questions. I try and get to every single comment and question that I can. And let me know what kind of content you're interested in having. I'm happy to oblige in making videos that interest y'all. All right, I'll be back tomorrow.